We also travel in numbers in case there's a vote today. We want to make sure we stack. My name is Mike Draper. I'm with a company called Argento Partners. This is my business partner, John Sandy, also with Argento Partners. And we handle the communications for Nevada Voters First, which is running the Vote Yes on 3 campaign. And we're joined by Doug Goodman, who has been a champion of a variety of different election reform efforts over the past several years. And Doug is one of the leaders of our grassroots coalition that's out talking to different groups about this initiative. And we really appreciate your time today. We really believe in not talking at you. Please don't wait till the end to ask questions. Some of you might know more about this than others. There's a lot of misconceptions about this because it seems very complicated, but in fact, it's pretty straightforward. So please don't hesitate to ask questions whenever the mood hits you. But I'm just going to quickly tell you a little bit about why this initiative and what this is. As many of you probably know, there's almost 600,000 Nevadans that can't vote in primary. We're talking the largest voting bloc in Nevada is not a registered Republican or Democrat. They can't vote in primary, which that sounds absurd when you think about it. And that number is growing exponentially every day. Furthermore, we've got poll after poll. I'm sure you've all seen a variety of polls. Poll after poll shows that people feel more and more frustrated that their votes don't matter, that their elected officials don't represent them, that their voices aren't, and that they have very little choice. And in fact, a lot of those people do have very little choice, right? 20% of people vote in the primary. So if you figure that 20% of people are making a decision for 100% of the state on who our two choices are in our general election, that's a problem. And that number continues to increase. We continue to see more and more vitriol in politics. And that number and that sentiment only continues to increase. So the time was right for an initiative like this. And we've seen a variety of different efforts to implement ranked choice voting. In fact, as Doug will tell you, ranked choice voting has been used over and over again in many municipalities and in many different ways for the last several, or 100 or 150 years. This is on the ballot because it does two things. This opens primaries, so it creates one primary where every registered voter can vote. And instead of then nominating one candidate from each party, we would take the top 5 vote getters from that primary, and they would advance to the general election. This creates an entirely different incentive system for our elected officials, right? So instead of just playing to their base, their vocal minority that would vote in a primary, they now have to appeal to a much larger audience, i.e. the majority, because the top 5 vote getters go to the general election. And then you'll have the opportunity, or all voters will have the opportunity to rank those top 5 candidates. So you could rank them 1 through 5. If we were doing 5 people in this room, I might pick Tom first, and Paul second, and Paul Nelson third. I could vote for 1, I could vote for 5. But now I have a say. If my top vote getter doesn't get 50% of the vote, my second place vote getter now is taken into account. So I have a say in my vote goes a lot farther, is essentially what it does. It sounds complicated, it's really not. We make choices every single day. Our opposition, unfortunately, is telling people that it's very complicated. Again, as Doug will explain, it's just not. In fact, in the states that do use it, we've seen voter participation go up. We've seen a wider variety of candidates get elected, representing a much wider group of communities and people. The results have been so far very, very positive when it comes to it. The only reason there's opposition, and no matter where it's been implemented or tried to be implemented, the opposition is always effectively the party that's in power, right? This is a matter of the two parties wanting to maintain some kind of control on the election system the way that it's been for the last 200 years. And what we're saying is that method just doesn't work anymore. We're disenfranchising voters, we're frustrating voters, people don't feel like they're represented, their voice doesn't matter. This is a way to start to restore that. I've talked enough, I'm sure I'll come back in, but I want to turn it over to Doug to address some of the specifics.
And you're gonna have to, I'm more comfortable standing. And I just want to address some of the things you might have heard.
because I think that's important at this particular point. You might have heard it's confusing. It's difficult. When the chamber sets their legislative priorities at every session, you have your top choice, your second choice, your third choice. You just set the priorities. Same way if you voted. If you want to go out for dinner tonight with a group, somebody wanted Chinese, somebody wanted steak, somebody wanted, Italian. First choice, second choice, third choice. We make decisions every day. It's not difficult. But let's get into some of the things. You've heard that it's confusing and it's complicated. Well, if it was that confusing and that complicated, over 55 political jurisdictions representing over 10 million voters would not be using it. 6 state Democratic parties would not be using it, and that includes Nevada. If you happen to be a member of the Democratic Party and voted early in the 2020 caucus, guess what? You were asked to rank your candidates. They don't like to admit that the vote choice vote. They say we were realigning. Okay. Both major political parties use it. Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, was nominated by the Republican Party in their convention using ranked choice voting. And you notice he didn't have to appeal to the far right wing to win. There are over 100 colleges and universities that use this. It's in Robert's Rules of Order. We all watch the Oscars. Guess what? How is Best Motion Picture chosen? And there are, various countries. There are other countries that use this and have been using it for a long time. Ranked choice voting, by the way, first started to be used in mid-1800s in the US. If it was so confusing, now Las Vegas City Councilwoman Olivia Diaz would not have sent a questionnaire out to her constituents in English and Spanish, asking for them to rank their top 3 issues. They say that it's confusing to minorities. What? By the way, underrepresented populations and minorities tend to turn out in greater numbers, rank more candidates, and their candidates actually do better in this type of an election. In all exit polls from ranked choice, when ranked choice voting is used, the approval rate is very close to or above 80%. They say, oh, it's going to take too long to tabulate. Our elections right now are tabulated automatically. Our election machines do not need to be reprogrammed, or we don't need new equipment to do this. And say, oh, people understand. Again, Joe Gloria, the Registrar of Voters of Clark County, would not have come out and said, people learn, this is easy. They've learned other changes we've done. I've heard about exhausted ballots or invalidated ballots. It's a difference. Exhausted ballots, if you don't rank all 5 candidates, let's say you only rank 1 or 2, and those 2 candidates are eliminated. Well, yeah, it's exhausted. What you've heard talk about is 140,000 ballots in New York City that were invalidated. Well, I've got news for you. Yes, that is correct. But not one of those ballots was cast by an actual voter. What happened in New York City was the elections division there, which has one of the worst ratings in the country, forgot to pull 140,000 test ballots before they went into the actual count. So yeah, there were 140 invalidated ballots, but not one cast by a voter. I think that's important to mention. You mentioned constitutional amendment. You'll hear this sometimes. Well, this doesn't belong in the Constitution. We have no choice. In 2015 legislative session, a BDR was filed by Senators Farley and Settlemeyer, who were chair and vice chair of the Senate Legislative Operations Election Committee. It was BDR 1149. BDR 1149 put forward a top 3 primary and ranked choice voting. The Legislative Council Bureau came back and said, this violates 2 sections of the Nevada Constitution. So we have no choice because the legislative lawyers already weighed in 2015.
Well, I would take it a step further than that also, Doug. our Constitution, and as it was alluded to, as Ann mentioned, we have to pass this through the ballot this year, and then it would have to pass successfully in 2024, which is what is required to change the Constitution. Our Constitution contemplates the right to vote or we've always contemplated the right to vote as being so important that we enshrine it in the Constitution. I think that's a fair premise. So in order to amend the right to vote, we need to change the Constitution. Nevadans had to have a chance to vote on that twice. We consider that a very serious right. And so that's why we're sitting here, is really that we have to pass it through twice. Some people have looked and said, well, we could do open primaries statutorily and do that in the legislature. But again, we contemplate the right to vote as being so important that it's in the Constitution. We've decided to address it this way so that we could address it and modify it in a comprehensive way instead of in a piecemeal way.
And I'd like to make just one really quick point. This is a very educated room here, so we can probably speak a little bit more frank than we would otherwise. But I think under our current election system, it's been used to weaponize policy. A number of you lobbyists here, how many times you guys heard that? I'm with you. I love this. It's a great concept. But if I vote for that, I'll get primary. Primary has become an adjective. It's become something that, and that's how we use our elections to weaponize, because what Mike laid out as the problem, 20% of the people are choosing the candidates for 100% of the electorate. And the reasons why is because of that partisan primary, where the parties have all the control. And you know, I was speaking earlier, the independents, a lot of times when they finally can vote at the general, the election's already decided. Most of our districts in this state are Republican or Democratic leaning districts, where it doesn't matter who gets through to the general, the Republican is going to win or the Democrats going to win. And in those districts, the independents their vote really doesn't matter. And I think that is a sad thing, because when they come to the general, that election's decided. Tom, you can attest to it. The Republican's going to win that district, or the Democrat's going to win that district. And so this changes the paradigm of elections, and it allows the systems not be used to weaponize something. And it forces candidates to lead towards their constituents, all of their constituents, and not looking at just a portion of their base. It should have a positive influence on policy, hopefully have a positive influence on the way candidates campaign, because right now, I mean, we're seeing right in the thick of it, right? Everybody's evil, everybody's done, horrible things, is under investigation, because nobody has to be liked by somebody that's not going to vote for them. But in this, because you rank your preference, being a second-ranked candidate is almost as important as being a first-ranked candidate. So you might hold back a little bit on all the negativity. You might try to get somebody that might not be predisposed to vote for you to choose you as their second. And so hopefully we're thinking that the system will have a positive influence on the way we elect our candidates, and then the way they govern when they go into Carson City and take their office. So a lot of positives from this. I think our current election system is antiquated. I'd be curious when the opposition comes in here, and if they think that the elections are working well. I mean, I don't know. I think it would be really hard for somebody that's rational and logical to say that this is really working well and producing good outcomes for us. So I will leave it.
What'll be said is that it's right now, and I guess it is. It's relatively easy. Everybody in theory can go to the primary. You can go change your registration, go down to the courthouse or go wherever and change your registration from nonpartisan to Republican or Democrat, or from Republican to Democrat. We've seen a lot of that this year. But there's a reason people are nonpartisan, right? They feel disenfranchised from the parties, or their beliefs don't align and they don't feel represented by the parties. So what we're telling people is, yeah, you might feel that way, but you still need to go, in order to vote, go register with one of these parties that you don't align with, that you don't feel it just to be able to vote on a candidate. I think we can all agree that's probably not what our forefathers intended. And we've gotten far away from that. We've seen poll after poll, and you've probably heard it in your households or in your neighborhoods or community, how often people feel they're voting for the lesser of two evils, right? We hear that all the time. And the polls show it. People more and more feel like they're being forced to vote for the lesser of two evils. Well, let's do something about it. And that's really what this whole effort is about, is to take a step towards doing something about it.
And what John said about the less negativity, the not having to worry about being primary, the ability to collaborate more when legislating, all that is backed up with fact, by the way. That is 100% true. But one thing I want to throw out though too, because Mike's been saying 20% of the electorate. There's a time, if only one party has candidates, that you actually have 10% or less deciding the winner, because if only one party has candidates, that winner of the primary goes to the general election unopposed. So if you have a 20% turnout in a, let's say, the Republican primary, which has 30% of the registered voters in the state, and you have 2 candidates or 3 candidates, that means that candidate is going forward unopposed with maybe 10% of their district support. So
Just a quick time check, your first 15 minutes have lapsed and your second 2 minutes have started.
I think we're ready to, please, if there's questions.
I have not, but I'll keep it simple. And I agree with one premise for sure. Brian Sandoval left the governor's office with a 78% approval rating, but by his own admission would never win a primary in the state. So, I mean, we understand that part of it. My questions are based on the mechanics. One is, you said that nothing has to change within the voting system itself, the machines. But is that because there's software and updates that we can bring into the fold that will make our existing machines able to rank? And then my second question is, every 10 years we go through reapportionment. I mean, in essence, what have you seen with the other states that go ranked choice voting? What happens to the reapportionment process at that point? You just say, hey, these are the number of voters you get.
okay, the voting machines are already programmed to handle ranked choice voting. What might be involved is a very small programming change to put that into effect. So there is no change to the actual software, no change to the actual process to tabulation of votes. Well, no, our voting equipment can handle it. It's just a matter of a coding change. As far as what happens with reapportionment and redistricting, I think you see that states have redistricting commissions, have different redistricting results versus a partisan legislature redistricting. But as far as the process itself, they're different. Redistricting is one thing, voting is another.
But well, to your point though, what we have seen is there's less gerrymandering, right? It's more of a science-based.
That's what I was getting at.
It's a science-based process based on numbers.
Yeah, you can
Much
be
more
a
so than-
Republican candidate and want to still have Republicans in your district, but you're competing.
And I think that's-
everybody gets to vote for it.
Tom, and I think you're hitting on a really important point too, is that, I think some of the people that are, been lifelong Republicans or the lifelong Democrats, they look at this and they say, oh, well, this is the Democrats trying to make it so we're less Republican, or anything. The voting, the way ranked choice voting works, is totally agnostic to party. Republican districts are still going to be Republican districts, and probably the outcome is going to be there will be a Republican candidate win there. The question is which Republican candidate. Is it one that panders to the base and does that, or one that looks at its constituency as a whole, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and say, I got to get a majority of all these votes, rather than I got to snag that 10%. And we all know it, right? We've talked to candidates. It's like, oh, what doors do you knock in? I'm knocking Republican doors. Get out the vote. I'm knocking Democrat votes or Democrat doors because I got to get out the vote. They're not trying to get a temperature for their entire constituency. They're targeting certain voters that they know are going to vote. They're going to get them elected, and they should under this system.
At the start of it, the President Biden gave, at the start of his presidency, when he gave his inauguration speech, I thought it was a good inauguration speech regardless of party, but part of what he made a big point of, right? And lots of presidents do, but he really focused on, I'm here to represent everybody, right? The people that did vote for me, I'm their president too, I'm gonna represent you. And we can all argue about whether he has or hasn't, but that's what he said, right? Well, he's not incentivized to do that. When re-election comes around, he's not planning on any Republicans voting for him. So really, he's not incentivized to follow through on that promise. But under this premise now, he can't just discard and say, I'm not getting any Republican votes, I'm gonna focus on this. He better do something to at least peel off some Republicans or get some Republicans to rank him second or third. So we're really talking about, let's incentivize our elected officials to represent the majority. Whether or not the majority ranks them 1, 2, or 3, if you get ranked fifth, there's a good chance you're not winning, period. So that's what we're talking about here is when we talk about changing the incentives.
In the primary, you've just increased the voter pool by 650,000 voters.
Just a quick question. It's 1 through 5, could be 1 through 10? I mean, 5 is the limit.
It was based on a number of different studies. 5 was, and it's also based, Alaska does this, right? Alaska does it with 4. Their population's smaller, so that was the right. So Nevada would be 5 would be the first to do 5 in the country based on population.
And based on that's the mechanics of the way it is too, right? So primary, the top 5 vote getters go on to the general, in which that's when you rank. So in the primary, it's just, you vote for your candidate, one candidate, and the top 5 who get the most votes move on to the general.
But independents could vote.
Exactly, correct,
Which
exactly.
creates a different pool or a greater pool of selection. And I guess my question is, has it been proven that the quality of candidates are improved?
Yes. We've seen that around the country, that typically the quality of candidates, it brings in a different kind of candidate. Because right now, to win a primary, you better be really play to the right base or the left base, and you better be, it's essentially that kind of talking point candidate. So somebody like Alan Spiegel has got a lot of business experience, might, in this environment, might decide not to run for the legislature, right? And I think that we can agree she's a very good legislator, but there's a lot of those people out there who go, I can't go far enough right. Even though I'm a business owner and I'm a lifelong Republican, I can't go far enough right to win in this election. So I'm staying out of this. Under this premise now, that opens the door for a lot of people to start to run and bring that kind of experience.
You have several instances where candidates will actually campaign together and actively ask for your second choice vote.
I have a question.
He's had his hand
Yeah,
up.
this is not intended as a devil's advocate question.
By all means,
So I'll preface
yeah.
it. You mentioned ranked choice was adopted in the 1800s, which I was not aware of. And 2 of you spent extensive time talking about confusion as being one of the top reasons for it not being adopted. My question has to do is, why has it taken over 100 years, all right, for ranked choice voting to sort of see its time, if indeed it was, is, as you say, a solution that should have been adopted 60 years ago, 70 years ago?
Well, the short answer is we have a duopoly in our government system. We have 2 parties that control it that don't want to see anything different enacted that might begin to erode some of that control. So that the short answer is that. The longer answer is we have an increasing number in the last several years, an increasing number of nonpartisan voters, right, of independents, of people that feel very frustrated by the 2 parties and have broken away and have started to say, look, I don't care, I'm going nonpartisan if they don't represent me. That growing base is what, 600,000 people in Nevada, our largest voting bloc, is when a concept like this can start to catch legs, when the 2 parties maybe fight against it, party insiders or establishment fight against it. That large base is what gives an opportunity like this. It might be a little disruptive, a little bit more representative to catch hold. It's just a matter of numbers.
It is. It goes down to party dynamics, because, like I said, the use of it in the U.S. actually goes back to the mid to late 1800s. It's been used, dropped. The longest continuing use is Cambridge, Massachusetts. They started using it in 1941. So yeah, it's more just, as Mike was saying, it's party dynamics, the duopoly.
I might take a slightly different approach to that, to answer your question. I think the substantial rise in independent voters and the inability for them to vote in the primary, I think, has really put a spotlight on the problems of the current system. But more than that, I think our culture, the way we obtain information has changed a lot in the last several years through social media and others. And I think it's really shown a light on the deficiencies of what politics is in DC and what it's becoming in Carson City. And so I think this is an idea that's seen its time. I don't think that the problems with the way that we currently elect people was as prevalent and as seen until recent years in politics.
A quick question about elections at the federal level. Now, obviously, every state has its own jurisdictions over its elections. How would implementing ranked choice voting in open primaries affect the ways Nevada elects a president every 4 years?
Maine right now is the first state looking at applying ranked choice voting to the presidential process. I think when you're looking at the presidential process, you're looking at a completely different animal, with the parties. There is an act in Congress that's looking at, how it could be applied nationwide in various scenarios.
But this one, this initiative doesn't impact federal races, so it's focusing on the state races.
Aside from US Senator, we would still use ranked choice for US Senator, since it's we're just.
US
electing
Senator,
senators for our
Congress,
state.
state legislature, and state constitutional officers would fall under this initiative.
Other partisan races as well, like county commission and that kind of stuff? Or is it,
So legally-
city council is already ranked choice, the top two go, right?
Right, essentially it is. Legally, that would be two different subjects if we did local jurisdictions. So we had to stick to the same.
We'll have to look at implementing legislation in the 25 session, and then that may come down to finances, a financial matter, because without extending to the county races and to the city races, the registrar will have to run 2 tabulation cycles.
Right.
So it would make sense for the implementing legislation to address that.
So if the two parties, I'm sorry, did I?
No, go ahead.
If there are 2 dominant parties, but there are 600,000 independents who are not able to vote in the primaries, that's a huge swath of people that presumably are in favor of ranked choice voting that could carry us across the finish line. I'm just saying that's the statement. The odds are that if they're independent.
Right, we're going on the same premise, or we're having the same hope that a lot of candidates are, right? Is hopefully all those independents turn out.
Right.
There's a lot of people that feel like their vote doesn't matter. So when you look at turnout models across the map, they rank all over because who knows how many people are going to turn out. They feel very frustrated that it doesn't matter if they turn out or not. So our hope is something like this. This is ballot question 3. There's only 3 ballot questions on the ballot. This is the very last question on the ballot. So so we're hopeful they'll turn out, that this is a motivating factor. This is something that we can begin to change our process, that we can create a different dynamic. We can see campaigns be more issue-based than political-based, that kind of stuff. But you're absolutely right. The interesting part is it still means you got to run a good campaign. It really doesn't diminish the value of the parties, right? The Republican Party can support their candidates and run good campaigns. The Democratic Party can do that. They can endorse their candidates. They can do all of those things. They just now are factored in with potentially a bunch of other candidates and a bunch of other voters.
This actually helps the major parties because it helps them widen their message, which is why they've lost voter share. But with question 3, the important thing it does is it gives the right to vote a voice and a choice to all Nevada voters. And the best summary of ranked choice voting I have ever heard: Santa Fe, New Mexico passed ranked choice voting in 2008. Because of legal tie-ups, they weren't allowed to use it until 2018. Following that election, Bill Richardson, former governor of the state, former U.S. UN ambassador, was quoted as saying, "I didn't know what ranked choice voting was, but it was well explained. And even though my first choice didn't win, my third choice did, so I felt my vote still mattered." To me, that is a fantastic summary.
It occurs to me, because all I've heard on the other side is how complicated this is. And I think of it as having worked at Baskin Robbins in my life. If I gave you 5 ice cream choices, I can rank chocolate over strawberry, over peppermint, over whatever. And it gives me more choice. And I am happy with all of them. If that's, I could taste all of them if I needed to, and ultimately eat whatever was chosen. I'm hoping that people don't get caught up in the complicatedness of this, because that's not really the point. The point is, it would be 600, it would be, instead of disenfranchising 600,000 Nevadans, it would be saying you're part of the process and your voice matters. You can't predict who will win, but you're getting a chance to, at the primary level, have a choice who runs.
At its core, this is about more choices, more voices.
There are two of the larger minor parties in the state. One doesn't like us because they would lose their automatic ballot access. The other actually supports this because it would force them to put up viable candidates. Candidates who could actually get the message out.
All right, that's time, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.